So Boris Johnson has just been taken to intensive care, probably like an hour or so ago. And I just wanted to give a quick update about it and talk about how I'm feeling about it in general. So just to give people the quick news report from the BBC, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been moved to an intensive care in hospital after his coronavirus symptoms worsened. Spokesperson said he was moving the advice of his medical team. Mr Johnson has asked Dominic Raab, who's the Foreign Secretary, to deputise where necessary. The Prime Minister, 55, was admitted to hospital in London with persistent symptoms on Sunday. And a number 10 statement said the Prime Minister has been under the care of doctors at St Thomas Hospital in London after being admitted with persistent symptoms of coronavirus. He worsened over the afternoon. I will skip over that part, and then just some analysis from the political editor. Very little information was shared until about 7 today, 7 p.m. We're told he's still conscious, but his condition has worsened over the course of the afternoon. He's been moved to intensive care as a precaution in case he needs ventilation to get through the illness. The statement from Downing Street makes clear he's receiving excellent care and he wants to thank the NHS staff. But something more important has changed, and he has felt it necessary to ask his Foreign Secretary to deputise him where it needs be. That is a completely different message from what we've heard over the past 18 hours, where it was continually the Prime Minister is in touch and he's in charge, and this changes everything. So obviously a lot of you aren't in the UK. There was a lot of scepticism around number 10 and the government constantly saying Boris was fine and he was doing all the meetings and he'll be back soon, but he's had it for 10 days now and he's being moved to intensive care. This obviously doesn't look good. The fatality rate is actually quite high for people going to intensive care with COVID-19. And I want to talk about the overall reception. So obviously loads of people wishing Boris Johnson well, saying, I hope you get better, we need you to lead the country and everything. I'm going to keep it real. I'm fairly apathetic to if he gets better or not. I'm not saying I want him to pass away, but it's kind of ironic now that someone who has pursued a certain strategy in fighting this pandemic has now got the disease. Now, some of you might not remember, about 3 weeks ago, it seems like ages ago, but 3 weeks ago, Boris Johnson was going on TV saying we should let the virus pass through the population and we should take it on the chin. He had prior knowledge of how bad this is going to be, and he didn't take advantage. He didn't do the lockdown quick enough, and he was saying that on TV. Let it pass through the population. So obviously, a side effect of that is many people thought this wasn't a big deal because he's saying, just get it. You know, maybe you have a little flu for a week, and then you'll be fine, and then we'll all be immune, and then it won't be as bad. That was his messaging. And then obviously his government pursued a herd immunity strategy, which is in line with what I've just said. They wanted most of the population to get it, apart from the vulnerable, so we could build up some herd immunity for it. And it was literal government policy. Dominic Cummings, his chief advisor, said a really callous thing saying, let it pass through the population, and if some old pensioners die, so be it. He said that. So that is the policy of his government. That is what their approach to the coronavirus was. Until a damning report, there will be hundreds of thousands of unnecessary deaths on your hands to the government, right? So, with the delays they took and pursuing this policy for a number of weeks, that has already created thousands of unnecessary deaths. And let's keep it real. There is blood on these people's hands, and when all is said and done, there's going to be an inquest into it, and we're going to see the failing of the government to properly address this pandemic. And I think that people like Boris Johnson, whether he passes away or not, are not going to come out of this very well. And now let's not forget about the mixed messaging, not enforcing the lockdown, giving people advice to stay inside and not really doing anything about it. Again, the speed in which they acted was pretty pathetic, especially when you saw what was going on in places like Italy. And now the UK is on course to becoming, a worse, I guess, case in terms of the whole country of the virus than Italy, which was seen as the worst place for a while, wasn't it? So that is all his government. Now, in that context, I don't really take the argument that I have to care if someone who pursued that policy lives or dies from the virus. Again, I don't care. I'm not wishing death on anyone. I'm not really like that. But if he passes, he was also bragging about shaking hands with people with coronavirus. Again, mixed messaging, making people think it wasn't a big deal, and how many deaths is going to be on his hands for pushing this strategy. So it's kind of ironic he's got it because he was making so light of the situation. Now, he was also part of two Conservative governments, his current one and the Theresa May one, and he was an MP, so his voting record is pretty awful, voting for not raising nurses' wages, voting for all these austerity policies, which the UN have said have directly contributed to deaths in this country. So I think what happens a lot of the time with politicians, you separate them from their political actions that cause deaths. Like I see in America right now, people are trying to rehabilitate George Bush. They said something the other day. George Bush would not let this many Americans die in terms of the pandemic, but he did kill like 500,000 Iraqis. But then it's the weird separation we sometimes do with politicians, because they're not getting in the trenches themselves. They're not going into war with a gun. They're not directly killing people through their own hands. They're pursuing policies. We somehow think that's not as bad. But again, when someone has pursued awful policies his whole life that have directly contributed to an economic climate that has killed people, and when he pursued this strategy, which was an outlier, not even America was doing this, and their response has been awful as well. Herd immunity is going to result in many, many more people dying, and he obviously bragging about shaking hands and not taking it seriously. It's really come back to haunt him. So again, I can't feel like, my heart isn't bleeding for someone who is going to be responsible for thousands of deaths, catching the virus himself, and potentially being in mortal danger. I can't pretend I'm going to. Again, he has, a pregnant girlfriend, so on a human level, I can obviously imagine, their experience there. He obviously has a big family. I'm not going to say he needs to stick around to be a good dad, because he's an awful dad. He doesn't even remember how many kids he has with multiple different women. But again, maybe he will change. Maybe he'll pull through for his fiance and his baby. So I can understand people getting emotional about those things. But I think when all is said and done, when you take his whole record, again, I'm not hoping he dies, but I'm saying I'm pretty apathetic to the fact if he does, just because of how awful the Conservatives have been in this country. And when you have an organisation like the UN saying that they're responsible for I forgot the exact number, but for at least hundreds, if not thousands, of deaths for austerity, again, it's kind of hard to feel sympathetic when they've never felt sympathetic for killing the poor. And through foreign policy, which, remember, he was the foreign secretary, killing poor peasants in the Middle East as well. I know we like to separate it, and I know we like to always, we relate to people who are like us. That's why in Europe, it's always so much more effective than when there's a terrorist attack that kills maybe one person, compared to terrorist attacks that happen all the time in Kabul and Afghanistan that kill literally like 50 or 200 people in one go. It's why we don't care about these things, because we can't relate to these people. So we can relate more, even though we don't feel very similar. We can relate more to someone like Boris Johnson because he's a British person, and he seems like he's just like us, or he's someone we know. So we feel worse for him, but maybe we don't feel as bad for the poor people who his policies, not just him, but the whole Tory party have decimated these parts of the country. Or his foreign policy. He was the foreign secretary, he's now the prime minister. I wonder how many drone strikes he's ordered, how much military action he's overseen during his time in the cabinet. You never know, but again, it's just something, when you tally up the deaths someone is responsible for, it's just hard to feel totally bad. The same way I would not feel bad if Donald Trump had the virus right now as well. And you can probably say, well, what if you get it? Well, if you're a right-wing conservative who's thinking like that, I'm pretty sure you're not going to care if I get it either. And there's loads of people die every single day, and you don't care about most of them. Even if you read these horrible stories, you could have read those stories about the people who've died from coronavirus, the nurses who've died, all these different things. And that's another point that just came into my head. The underfunding of the NHS. I have a family who work in the NHS. Who aren't going to be able to wear, the masks and the ventilators and everything. So you can't tell me that I should be sad when it's the Tories who have underfunded, policies that are, or cut policies that are going to directly impact my family. I have nurses in my family who are just wearing a mask, no face protection. They're dealing with people with coronavirus. And of course, the viral load means that this could kill them pretty easily. And that's what I'm having to deal with because of the Tories. Of course, no one can prepare properly for this pandemic, but at the same time, the underfunding, the cuts, all this austerity policies is contributing to deaths, and the policy the government pursued to start with is factoring into how many people are going to die in this pandemic. Anyway, let me know what you guys think. So, if I seem a bit callous, I guess that's just me personally. Let me know what you think. Should you care? What happens next? Dominic Raab might become the new Prime Minister. He's the Foreign Secretary who's going to be acting as a Prime Minister for a while. Traditionally, I think the Chancellor is meant to take over, but he seems relatively inexperienced, so I think it would be maybe Dominic Raab. But let me know what you guys think in the comments, and if you made it this far, thank you for watching.